Welcome to assignment 2. Today we're going to start working with points and lines in Autodesk Civil 3D. We're going to go ahead and start by taking our existing project and copying it so we can build on what we did previously. We want to copy our previous project just in case something happens. We don't want to lose all the work that we've already done. So let's open up our previous folders that we had where the existing project was stored. And we're going to start by creating a new folder. So in this case, I'm going to my land surveying folder, my surveying technology assignments folder. I'm going to create a new folder specifically for this assignment. And I'm going to call this folder Autodesk Civil 3D, working with lines and points. Okay. Once you have that new folder created, oops, and I see a little bit of typo in mine. Once you have the new folder created, let's go to where we saved the assignment for the last one. So here is the assignment right here. It's this DWG file, and we can see, we remember because it was saved, the first initial of your first name and your last name, intro to top link in Civil 3D. So we're going to take this and we're going to copy it over to that new folder that we created. So then we'll paste it into the new folder, and once it's been pasted, we want to rename this file. So we're going to rename it in the same naming convention we did for the last one. So it's the first initial of your first name and then your last name, then underscore Civil 3D, working with lines and points. Let's open the assignment that we just copied into our new folder. To do this, we'll open Civil 3D and we'll go to our Open button here. Let's navigate to our original folder, land surveying, the assignments, that new folder that we created, and then the assignment. And then we will click Open. And when a Civil 3D project opens, it'll open at the point that you closed it at. So right now you can see we're here in the layout view. Let's go to the model view. And we can see that we have all of these, the points are still here. If for some reason you've opened the assignment and you don't see the imported point data that we did from last week, try copying the project again. If once again you don't see the imported point data, open last week's project and see if the points are actually in there. If they're not, you'll have to re-import them. So go through that process, follow last week's video. While we're here, let's go over some important commands in Civil 3D. As we go through these, you'll be using these throughout the semester, so pay attention to them and try them. Follow along while we do this. The first command is regen, and that command is just RE. So you just start typing RE, and then you'll hit enter and regen. That's pretty much a reload. It's like hitting the refresh button on a web browser. If you were to import something into Civil 3D, or maybe you made some changes and for some reason they just don't show up, type in RE regen, it'll refresh the model and hopefully it'll show up then. The next important command that we're going to use is pline, also known as polyline. To do that, you type in PLINE. As you saw when I started typing, you can pretty much just type PL and pline will happen. A polyline is a bunch of individual line segments that are joined together into one full line. To work with a polyline, you put your cursor where you want to start the line, and then you click, and it'll start drawing the line. And then wherever you want to add a vertex, you're going to left click again. It'll keep adding these vertices. This is different from the line command. Line is LINE. That's the line command. And a line command will only draw. You can draw lines, but each one of them will be individual line segments. So that's the difference here. The next command that will be important is like a polyline, but it is the 3D poly option. So to do that one, it's 3D poly. And when you start drawing, you'll notice it appears to be a lot like the polyline command. The only difference here is that the 3D poly will actually draw on a three-dimensional plane, whereas the polyline will only draw 2 dimensions. We'll use the 3D polyline in a second, but for instance, each one of these points you can see is at a slightly different elevation. If I wanted to draw a line to connect these 2 points, I'd use a 3D polyline. because it would start over here at the elevation of 987.94, and then as I draw it, the end would be at 987.46. If I were to draw just a regular polyline, you wouldn't see that elevation difference. So you want to use 3D polylines to draw on a 3D plane, and regular polylines to just draw on a 2D plane. Something to note is that regular polylines, you can get the area of them more easily than you can from a 3D polyline. So if you were just drawing the outline of a parking lot, for example, and you don't need to know the actual elevations, you're just interested with maybe calculating the square feet or the yardage of the asphalt that you need to order in, you could just draw that with a polyline. Another important command is the join and explode commands. These work together and they're opposites of each other. So let's say that I have this polyline right here and I want to break it apart because I want to be able to adjust each one of these line segments individually. I'd select the polyline by hovering over it, and you'll see it will kind of highlight a little bit. Then I would left click on it and it highlights blue, and then you just type in EXPLODE, explode. And now you can see the polyline has broken up into the individual line segments. So it is no longer one continuous line. Now let's say we wanted to do the reverse of that. Let's say we started with a line command, or we broke apart a polyline and we want to put it back together. I would select those line segments and then I would type in join. You type join and hit enter, and then it connects it as a polyline again. The last command here is properties. So remember how earlier I was talking about how with a polyline you could easily draw it and get the area of the shape? Well, in order to see that area and the other information, you'd want to see the properties of the polyline. So to do that, I'd click on the polyline and then I'd type in PROP, properties. And you'll see what happens is this properties panel pops up, and it's detached from the other panels over here. And you can come over here and you can expand it to make it bigger. You bring your cursor to the bottom edge of the box and you'll see that your mouse change, and that's how you know you can click and drag it and change the box size. But here, for example, I can see all of the information about this polyline, also known as the properties. We see here the area of the inside of this polyline and the length. Something to know about the properties panel is it will show you the properties for whatever object is currently selected. So in this case, you can see there's no selection. So it just tells you the general properties, like what layer you're currently drawing on and your line type. But if I were to come over here and select this 3D polyline, now it shows me the information about this. So the properties panel, you can leave it open and you can easily go through and you can click. You can even use it to see information about a point. Let's say I want to see the information for this power box point right here. You can see right here, there's no name specifically for it, but I can see my northing, easting, and my point elevation. So this is all the properties of that. And you saw here, I was using that properties properties panel, and it was originally floating over here. If you'd like, you can pin it to the space, I'll call it, and you drop it next to the prospector tab, or really anywhere that you'd want to have it by dragging this kind of darker part of the properties box. You can also collapse it. This is the button to collapse the box. It's called auto hide. So when you scroll over the properties right here, it'll cause it to expand, and then when you leave, it'll cause it to collapse. Or you can just close the properties there. Another important part of working with Civil 3D is being able to select the objects that we have that we've put in the software itself. One of the easiest ways to select an object is to just hover over it until it highlights, and then you can just click on it and you can select the object that way. There's a couple of options that you can use to mask select objects. If you were to take your cursor over to an empty space and you were to click it and then you were to drag, you'll see this box show up. There's a couple different types of boxes. When we take our cursor and we drag from right to left, we get what's called the cross selection box, also known as the green selection box, you'll see. What happens with this green selection box is any part of an object it touches, it will select. So I'm touching part of this polyline with this cross selection box and it'll select the whole polyline. Once again, I'm doing the same here. You see I'm touching only part of this line segment right here, and it selects that. So cross selection is good if you need to select a large amount of objects, and you can get in like that. The other option is if you take your cursor and you highlight from left to right. This is what's called the window selection, also known as the blue selection. The window selection will only highlight once the entire object is inside the box. You can see this polyline, we have to wait until the entire object was inside the box for it to select. You can see here this is useful because I really only want to select this portion of this line here. Well, instead of having to get on it real close and select it, I can just get a window selection box, and as long as only that portion of the line is fully inside the box, it will select that. You can press and hold your mouse to do lasso selections that follow the exact same principles. If you go from right to left, you will get the cross selection, and if you go from left to right, you will get the window selection. In Civil 3D, if you want to deselect an object, you can hit escape. Pressing escape is the magic back button. If there's any action you're doing and you just kind of want to stop doing it, just press escape. Let's go ahead and practice using the cross selection box to clean up what we've drawn here. So we're just going to select everything that we've drawn, and then we'll just hit delete. Let's start working with point groups. A fantastic part of Civil 3D, and one of the main reasons we provided this template for you, is that we can group points into what is aptly named a point group. And this is very useful because instead of having to go through and change the individual properties of the point, we can actually change the point group properties, and it will apply to all the points within the group. It's also useful for hiding and showing these point groups. So in our Prospector tab, we can see point groups over here. And if we hit this plus, we can see all of the point groups that are in this project. Normally, what you should see is you'll see kind of a dot next to point groups that have points in them. If you don't see that, something that you might have to do is right-click on this point groups header right here and hit update. And now you see these little dots show up. That's something important to keep in mind. Anytime you make a change to a point group or you add new points into Civil 3D, you will most likely have to come and update the point groups for that data to process correctly. Now that we've done that, we can see that we have points in the tree point group, in the temporary control point group, in the sidewalk edge, fence post. We have points in all of these point groups over here. And then of course there's points in the all points group. If we wanted to see what points were in these point groups, we'd select the point group by clicking on it, and then we'd want to expand this list down here. This list has all the points inside that point group, and it tells you the point number, the northing, the easting, the elevation, the description, and you can do that for each point group here. You can see we only have 3 in temporary control points. Point groups, in order for them to work the way that we have them set up in this program, are set to automatically classify the point when it imports into the software based on the point code or the description given to the point. For example, if I come in here, let's do light pole. If you select a point group and right click and click on properties, you can see right here it gives you some information about the point group. For example, the point style is this little point, this X right here. This is known as the point style. So here's a light pole. So if I were to come into here in properties and I were to change the point style, for example, let's say a utility pole, and I were to select that and hit apply, you'd see that the point style changes. And this applies to all points inside that point group. You can do the same thing, water valve. You can apply that here. You see the point style changes. I'm just going to put it back to basic. That's what we've set all of these point groups to be by default in this template we've provided you. Then the point style label. So the point style label is the point number, elevation, description. You can change that. So say northing, easting. Now it changes the northing and easting there. By default, every single point group is set to have a point style of basic and a point style label of point number, elevation, description. You can go through, and it's encouraged that you go through and adjust these point styles and the point style labels to better reflect what each item is. One point group that is not affected by the settings that you put in the point group properties itself would be trees. You can see trees here. If I change the point style, it doesn't actually really change the way that the tree looks in Civil 3D. That's because Civil 3D recognizes the point code for a tree, and it doesn't seem to follow the same logic or rules there. When we start working with layers, I'll show you how to hide the trees, but for now, just keep in mind that trees are more difficult to change the way that they look. Let's go ahead and create a point group for all of these topo points. So what happens in Civil 3D when you import the points, let me open up a point group and show you. For example, we'll do this light pole. So light pole has the point code of LP right here. So what happens in Civil 3D when we create the point group is we have, if we come over here to this include tab, this include tab says include any point that when the data is imported, the raw description, meaning the point code, matches LP. And then this asterisk is a wildcard that says look for anything that has LP and then has anything after it. So that means that you could have something show up in Civil 3D. We could, in the total station when we record the data, we could have something that said LP-1, and because that asterisk is there, it will still show up under the point group of light pole. So let's create a new point group for our topo points, because currently there's no point group for our topo points. They're just sitting in the all points section. And something that you can do to check and see what point codes you might not have a point group for is change the properties of your all points section to a point style other than the basic point style. I'll just do the benchmark one because it shows as blue and different. And you can see here, any point that is not in its own point group will automatically by default be in the all points group, and it will have its point style changed. So looking at this, I can see because this symbol has changed, I see a lot of topo. I don't see any other points with any other point codes or raw descriptions that need to be created. So let's go here. I'm just going to change all points back to basic, and now we can create a new point group. So the easiest way to create a new point group is just to copy one that's already been created. So copy any point group. If you right click on it and you hit copy, you'll see that it will now show up at the top list in the top of the point groups list. So you can right click on it and hit properties. And in this case, we're creating these for the topo. So these are the points that we're using for the topo map. So I'm actually just going to name the points topo. For now, I'm going to leave the point style and the label style the same, but I need to go over to include, and I need to change it so that the raw description is TOPO, and I need to include that asterisk, the wildcard. Something that you can do, this is a little more advanced, is if you create the point groups and you put the asterisk before topo, you could then have data enter Civil 3D that looks something like this. Like it could say, for example, BM1-topo. And Civil 3D is going to say, well, that asterisk means look for anything that has topo after it, and it would include that. So here we just need the topo and then the asterisk. And then I'll hit OK. And then we just made that change, and you see it shows up here in topo, and now we can see that points are in that point group. Best practice, we should still update our point groups list here. Let's go ahead and start hiding point groups that we don't need to work with. Now, something that we could do, and we're going to work on layers next, is we could make separate layers for each point group. But something that I was able to find is if you just take point groups and you make the all points point group, and you change the properties of it, and you change the properties to none. This is important. Make the properties of the all point group to none. Now, to move the order of the point groups like layers, you'd right click on point groups and you'd hit properties, and now this list shows up. This is the order of the point groups in the prospector tab. If I move all points to the very top, what these buttons are is this button means move it to the very top of the list, this button means move to the very bottom of the list, and these buttons mean move up or down 1, depending on how many times you click it. If I move all points to the very top of the list and hit OK, you'll see now that all the points, their point styles are missing now. If I want to make sure that the point descriptions are gone too, or also hidden, I want to make sure I change the point label style to none as well. And you'll see that this hides all the points except for the trees. And we'll discuss on how to hide the trees in a moment. Whatever layer that I want to show, so certain layers, let's say I want to show the topo points. I'd come to point groups and I want to change the order of the point groups again. I want to make sure that topo is above all points. I can hit this button to just move it to the top, and you'll see now that these topo points show up. So the way that this works in this list, and the easiest way to describe it, is if you make all points, if you make the point style and the point label style none, then anything that is above all points in point groups will show, and anything that is below all points will be hidden. Let's add another one. Let's take, why don't we take this irrigation box here? I'd go to point groups. To adjust the order of the point groups, I go to properties. I find what I want. I want an irrigation box, and I want to move it above all points. In this case, I know if I move it all the way to the top, it'll be above all points. And now we can see a few more points appeared like that. Civil 3D places objects on what's called layers. If you're familiar with the photo editing programs such as Photoshop, you understand that the way layers work is you can imagine it as pieces of paper on top of each other. If you draw something on the lowest piece of paper and then you stack another piece of paper on top of it, you won't be able to see what's on that lower piece of paper. But let's say, for example, you draw something on a bottom piece of paper and then you put a transparent piece of paper on top of it, you can then see what's on top of that. It's the same thing. So the way that layers work and the way to edit layers is you come over here in your ribbon under Home and you click on Layer Properties. And you can see here that it opens this huge list full of all kinds of layers, and you may or may not use all of these layers. The way that a layer works is you can draw something on that particular layer and then you can turn that layer on and off. Just imagine it as pieces of paper that you're taking on and off the desk. But these pieces of paper are transparent and you're drawing on top of them. So for example, if I were to come here, layer 0 is the default layer, and it's the layer that is currently selected. You can tell which layer is the current layer by the green check mark next to it. It's called the active layer. This is important to note because you cannot freeze the active layer, and the active layer is the layer that you are currently drawing on. So let's talk about what freezing a layer does versus on and off layer. So let's say I have a layer that I want to freeze or turn on and off, basically hide. The way that it works in Civil 3D is you can toggle on and off. Oh, see, I had the active layer on, so it wouldn't let me. You can turn it on and off, but the better thing to do here is actually hit freeze. What happens when you hit freeze is it takes the layer out of Autodesk's or the Civil 3D's memory, and it will actually speed up your drafting process if there's a bunch of data that you're really not trying to look at. We're not going to be working with a bunch of data here, so we won't be freezing and unfreezing very many layers, but one layer that we will be working with is the trees layer. Trees, because Civil 3D recognizes them as their own object and places it on its own layer, trees show up on a layer that the other points don't show up on. And to find the trees are under v-node-tree. And watch, if I freeze, you'll see now that the trees disappeared and they show back up. So that's one way that you can hide the trees. Something that we can do in Civil 3D, because this is a really long list of layers, is if you right click on a layer, you can hit rename layer. And if we place an underscore at the very beginning of that layer, and then we make sure that we sort by name going down, clicking up here on the top of this table, and you can sort by name, and you'll see that anything with the underscore will show up at the very top of the list. So now if I were to come here to layers, layer properties, I could very quickly freeze and unfreeze the tree layer. That way I don't have to worry about dealing with it while I'm trying to draft. Let's go ahead and create a new layer because we're going to draw the edge of the sidewalk. So to create a new layer, once again we're going to be in the layer properties panel, and creating new layers is like copying an old one. Just like how when we copied an existing point group to create a new one, creating a new layer works much the same way, but it's even easier. You want to select a layer that is similar to the final characteristics you want to see in the other layer. It doesn't really matter in this case. We just want to make sure that the printer, you don't see this little stop sign looking thing next to the printer, because that means it will not show up when we go to plot. So I'll just take this and we'll just choose road here. So if I select a layer, I can create a new layer by coming up here, and I can hit this, it looks like these 3 sheets of paper with a little star at the bottom right. If I click that, it'll create a brand new layer, and if you look at it, you can see that the properties that it takes the same color, the same line type, line weight, all of that it takes from the layer that I previously selected. So for this new layer, I'm going to go ahead and name it underscore, because I want it to show up at the very top of the list, and I'm going to do it in capital letters because I think that looks better. SDWK for sidewalk dash edge. And I want to change the description for this layer. So we'd right click on the layer and hit change description. And for this, I'm just going to change it to be sidewalk edge. That way I know what it is. Now, because we're going to be drawing on this layer, I want to set it as the active layer. So I'm just going to double click on it, and now I see the check mark next to it, and it means it's the active layer. So now I can close the layer properties. You'll also see right here, whatever layer is shown in this drop down, this will be the active layer. So I can also change the active layer by clicking on this drop down and then selecting the layer that I want to be on. Let's draw the lines around the sidewalk edge. To start, let's make the sidewalk edge be the only thing that shows up here. So I'm going to go to point groups and properties, so I can make sure that all points goes all the way at the top so I can hide everything else. And then I want to find my sidewalk edge. And here I know that it's sidewalk edge, not concrete. I move this to the top. And I know this because when I was in this list, there's a couple different options for sidewalk edge. So there's sidewalk edge concrete and sidewalk edge not concrete. I know that the points that I want are in sidewalk edge concrete because it has this little dot next to it. So if you don't know which one you want to show and which one you want to hide, come back to the points group list in the prospector tab, and it'll show you which one has the points. And I also want to hide the trees, and we just learned how to do that. So we'll open up layer properties, and I'm going to freeze v-node-tree. And there we go. And now you can see the sidewalk edge. So in order to draw the lines that are going to connect between these points, we're going to need to draw a 3D polyline. So I'm going to type in 3D for 3D poly. And you can see right here, I want to make sure that it'll snap to my point, and I can see indeed it does, because in my object snap settings, I have node turned on. So I want to let it snap to the first point here. I'm going to click on it, and then it's going to come here, and I see that green show up on my next point. I'm going to connect it there. And we follow this process, and we're going to go all the way down the sidewalk on the edge. And you can see here there's a big gap. That's okay. We just want to follow the sidewalk all the way down. And what I'm doing here while I'm doing this is I am clicking the point, pressing and holding the scroll wheel on my mouse to pan. And I'm getting to the next point, and I'm zooming in and out as needed to see. So now that I've come to the very last point on this sidewalk edge, I'm going to hit escape, and then I'm going to do 3D poly again, because I want to draw a separate line for each edge of the sidewalk. And we're just going to do the same thing and follow all the way back up. Okay, fantastic, and I'll hit escape again. And there we go. We have the lines that show our sidewalk edge. Now this is important because we'll do this for all sorts of things. We'll do it for curbs, we'll do it for edges of parking lots. We can really do it for anything. But now, let's take, I'm going to show you this, we'll take the point groups, and I'm going to move all points to the bottom again, so I can show all of the points in the drawing, and I'm going to unfreeze trees. See, now, before it just looked like a bunch of points. Now we can clearly see where the sidewalk is in all of this. Now that we're in the Layout tab, we'll see up on the ribbon there's Layout Tools and Layout that show up in blue. If we click on the Layout tab in the ribbon and we go over here to Page Setup, we can see there's these current page setups for the layouts. These are both 8.5 by 11 on the plot size. There's a couple different things we could do. We could either just change the plot size, or we can create a new one. That's what we're going to do for this. So we're going to go New, and we want to name this 11 by 17, and we'll hit OK. And now it shows all of these different options. Now, because it's 11 by 17, we know that we're going to only print to PDF in this class. So we're going to choose our PDF printer of choice. I'm going to choose Microsoft Print to PDF. This is something that everyone should have, and it will be able to print 11 by 17. And then we want to make sure the paper size is tabloid. Tabloid is also known as 11 by 17. The last thing that we need to check here is that the drawing orientation is set to landscape, and as long as that all looks good, we can hit OK. And then we need to select 11 by 17 here and hit Set Current. And then after that, we can close. Once we do that, we're going to need to resize the viewport to take up the entire space of this 11 by 17 paper. So just like we did last week, we're going to select the viewport, and I can click on this right there, and we can make it a little bit bigger. And then we also want to move our title block. And in this case, I'm going to select both the title block and the text, and I can type M to move, and you just select a point on the title block. See, I can kind of snap to this corner here, or actually snap to this bottom one, and then I click it, and then I can drag it, and I just want to bring it over to the corner here. Once again, the way that looks is I used my window selection box to select only the title block, or the text and the rectangle around it. And once that's selected, I type M for move, and then I grabbed onto a corner of it, and then we can move it around. Now that we have that moved, we need to change the text so that it reflects the current assignment's name. Super simple. I'm just going to hover over the text. We'll see it change colors. I can double click on it, and then we can edit this bottom line so that it reads lines. Oh, and I want that capitalized, lines and points. That's just what we'll call it. And that looks great. Okay, now we are going to go ahead and print it. So we're going to come over here and hit this plot button. I want to plot just a single sheet. We'll come in here and review and make sure our settings look good. PDF, great. Tabloid, great. Layout, landscape, great. Fantastic. We hit preview. And the preview looks good. Everything is scaled correctly. Everything's showing up. So now I can hit my actual print button. And it's going to ask me where we want to save it. We want to make sure that we are in the folder that we made for this week. And we're going to name it first initial, followed by the last name, underscore, working with line. Oh, actually, it should be, my bad, it should be underscore civil 3D, working with lines and points, and then plot in capital letters right there. We'll save that, let it export and print, and then let's open up that folder and make sure that it plotted correctly. Okay, this is looking good. Although it is rotated incorrectly, that's not a big deal. We can submit it rotated incorrectly, and this looks great. Something we want to do at this point, if we haven't already, and I would highly recommend that you do this before this point, is go back into Civil 3D, and we want to save the project either by doing Control S or typing in the command Q save, and that will save the project. We need to make sure that this project is saved because we will be using it again for next week's assignment.